You think you know what's happening with Bron Breakker? You think this is just another wrestling storyline, another manufactured moment designed to pop the crowd and sell some merchandise? Let me tell you something right now. You're being worked, and not in the way you think. While everyone's sitting around debating whether Bron has what it takes to be the next big thing, whether he's worthy of the Steiner legacy, whether he can carry a championship, nobody's talking about the real story. Nobody's asking the question that actually matters. Why is Brock Lesnar, the beast incarnate himself, the man who doesn't need anyone, suddenly taking an interest in molding Bron Breakker's career? And before you type your little comment saying I'm reaching, saying I'm making mountains out of molehills, understand this: when Brock Lesnar moves, when he attaches himself to something, there's always a reason. And that reason is never just about helping someone else. So buckle up, because what I'm about to break down is going to change everything you thought you understood about what's really going on behind those curtain calls and those carefully scripted promos. Let's rewind the tape here. Bron Breakker bursts onto the main roster with all the intensity of a freight train that's lost its brakes, destroying everything in his path, and people are eating it up. The comparisons start immediately. He's got the look, he's got the intensity, he's got that Steiner bloodline coursing through his veins, and suddenly everyone's crowning him as the next monster heel, the next unstoppable force. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is where most of you stopped paying attention because you were too busy fantasy booking his WrestleMania main event. The machine starts to recalibrate. The booking gets inconsistent. One week he's demolishing former world champions. The next week he's in a nothing feud that's going nowhere. The crowd reactions start to split. Some people are all in. Others are starting to question if he's being pushed too hard too fast. And that's when Brock makes his move. Now Brock Lesnar showing up isn't unusual. The man's a special attraction. He comes and goes as his contract and his bank account dictate. But paying attention to a developing star, taking someone under his wing, offering guidance and mentorship, that's not the Brock Lesnar we've seen for the past 2 decades. This is a guy who's famously kept to himself, who shows up, does his job, collects his check, and goes back to his farm in Saskatchewan. He's not a locker room leader. He's not cutting promos, putting over young talent. He's not backstage giving advice to the up-and-comers. Brock Lesnar cares about Brock Lesnar, period. So when he starts inserting himself into Bron Breakker's trajectory, when he starts being seen having conversations with him, when his name starts getting dropped in relation to Bron's development, alarm bells should be going off in your head. Here's what's really happening. And you can call me a conspiracy theorist all you want, but connect the dots yourself. Brock sees in Bron what everyone sees: the potential to be a legitimate main event monster heel for the next decade. But more than that, Brock sees an opportunity. He sees a younger, hungry version of himself, someone with the physical gifts, the intensity, the legitimate athletic background that made Brock himself such a phenomenon. But there's a crucial difference. Bron's still moldable. He's still figuring out who he is in this business. He hasn't yet developed that iron will independence that Brock has, that refusal to bend to anyone's vision but his own. And that's exactly what makes him perfect for what Brock has in mind. Think about Brock's legacy. What happens when he finally hangs up those boots for good? He's going to be remembered as one of the most dominant forces in wrestling history. Absolutely. But he's never created anything beyond himself. He's never built a faction. He's never mentored someone to greatness. He's never left behind a lineage that extends his influence beyond his own career. Paul Heyman will be remembered for creating ECW, for managing multiple legendary careers, for being a creative genius. Stone Cold will be remembered not just for his run, but for his influence on an entire generation of wrestlers. The Rock built an empire beyond wrestling. What's Brock's lasting impact beyond his own matches? This is his chance to change that narrative, to shape someone in his image, to create a monster that carries his vision forward long after he's done. And let's talk about what that vision actually is. Because this is where it gets dark. This is where Bron should be worried. And this is where the WWE Universe should be paying very close attention. Brock's vision of what a top star should be is simple. Be an attraction, not a wrestler. Show up when you want. Work the schedule you dictate. Never give more than you absolutely have to. And collect maximum money for minimum effort. That worked for Brock because he earned that position through years of grinding. Through becoming such a massive star that he could dictate terms. But what happens when you instill that mindset in someone who hasn't paid those dues yet? What happens when you teach someone that the business exists to serve them before they've learned to serve the business? You're watching it happen in real time, and nobody wants to admit it. Bron's fury, this intensity that everyone praises, it's starting to bleed into something else. It's starting to become an excuse for recklessness, for unsafe work, for a sense that he's owed something rather than having to earn it. And every time someone backstage tries to pump the brakes, tries to suggest maybe he needs to develop more psychology, more storytelling ability, more connection with the audience beyond just physical dominance, there's Brock, telling him to ignore the noise, telling him that intensity and physicality are all that matter, telling him that if he's the most credible athlete in the room, then nothing else matters. It's toxic mentorship disguised as empowerment. And the scary part is Bron's eating it up because he doesn't know any better. Now some of you are thinking, wait, isn't this good for Bron? Isn't learning from one of the greatest of all time exactly what he should be doing? And on the surface, sure, that makes sense. But dig deeper. What made Brock successful isn't just his physical gifts or his intensity. It was his timing, his circumstances, his uniqueness. He came into WWE at a time when they desperately needed a new monster, when the Attitude Era was ending and they needed someone to bridge into the next generation. He had Paul Heyman, a genius manipulator and storyteller, handling everything he couldn't do on the microphone. He left WWE at the peak of his initial run, gained massive credibility in UFC, and came back as an even bigger star with even more leverage. Those circumstances can't be replicated. Trying to copy Brock's formula without Brock's specific situation is like trying to recreate lightning in a bottle using store-bought batteries. Here's the part that should really make you angry though, and this is where I need you to stay with me, because this is the heart of the whole issue. Brock isn't helping Bron out of the goodness of his heart. This isn't some feel-good story about a legend giving back to the next generation. Brock is creating his succession plan, his retirement project, his legacy insurance policy. And the cost of that isn't being paid by Brock, it's being paid by Bron. Every piece of advice that prioritizes being an attraction over being a complete performer. Every lesson that teaches him to take shortcuts. Every moment that inflates his ego beyond what he's actually accomplished. That's costing Bron the chance to develop into something potentially greater than just a Brock clone. Bron Breakker could be his own unique force, could create his own legacy, could be remembered for carving his own path. Instead, he's being groomed to be Brock Lesnar and that's a ceiling, not a floor. And let's be brutally honest about what this means for WWE programming and for you, the fans who actually pay money to watch this stuff. The Brock Lesnar model of part-time attraction who shows up for big events and collects a massive check while everyone else grinds week in and week out. That's terrible for the overall product. It creates a two-tiered system where some guys are made to look like stars who matter and everyone else is just filler. It devalues championships because they disappear for months at a time. It kills storyline momentum because you can't build week-to-week tension when your top guy isn't there week to week. The Brock model works for Brock and works for WWE's bottom line when they can use him as a special attraction. But it's poison for creating a healthy, sustainable main event scene. And now Brock is teaching Bron that this is the model to aspire to. That this is what success looks like. The fury you see from Bron, that intensity that everyone loves. Imagine what it becomes when it's no longer channeled into proving himself, into earning his spot, into winning over every single person in the building. Imagine when it becomes entitlement, when it becomes a shield against criticism, when it becomes justification for taking shortcuts. That's the path he's on right now, and Brock's guidance is accelerating that journey. You're watching a potential generational talent being molded into a limited attraction, and everyone's applauding because they can't see past the short-term spectacle to recognize the long-term damage. There are people backstage who see this happening, who recognize the problem, but what are they going to do? Tell Brock Lesnar he's wrong. Challenge the vision of one of the biggest stars in company history. Risk creating backstage friction by trying to intervene in someone else's mentorship. The political reality of wrestling means that sometimes the wrong thing happens because the right people don't have the power or the courage to stop it. And Bron's caught in the middle, thinking he's getting the opportunity of a lifetime when really he's being programmed to have a specific type of career that serves someone else's legacy, more than his own potential. You want proof this is already causing problems? Look at how Bron's being booked compared to 6 months ago. Look at how his matches are structured, how his feuds are playing out, how he's being presented. It's becoming more about spectacle and less about story. It's becoming more about showing dominance and less about creating genuine emotional investment. His matches are getting shorter, more focused on big moves and destruction, less interested in building drama or telling a story. That's the Brock influence bleeding through. And while it might pop the crowd in the moment, it's not building the kind of sustained connection that creates a true top star. It's building a highlight reel performer. And there's a massive difference. The really insidious part is how this affects Bron's development in areas where he actually needs work. His promo skills, while improving, still need refinement. His character work, beyond just being an intense destroyer, could use more layers, more depth, more reasons for people to invest emotionally beyond just being impressed physically. His in-ring psychology, the ability to work different styles and tell different types of stories depending on the opponent and the feud. That takes years to develop and requires being willing to be vulnerable, to have matches where you're not dominant, to show different facets of your ability. But when you're being told by Brock Lesnar that all you need is to be the most credible athlete in the room, when you're being taught that intensity covers all sins, why would you put in that extra work? Why would you spend time developing skills that your mentor is essentially telling you don't matter? This is how you end up with performers who have a shelf life instead of a career. This is how you create shooting stars instead of sustained main event. Look at the difference between someone like Brock and someone like Roman Reigns. Roman spent years, painful years for him personally with the crowd rejection, learning and growing and developing layers to his character. He was willing to be hated for the wrong reasons until he figured out how to be hated for the right reasons. He developed into a complete performer who can work any style, cut any kind of promo, tell any kind of story. That's because he had mentorship from people like The Rock who understood that you have to be more than just physically impressive. You have to connect, you have to entertain, you have to give people a reason to care beyond just being impressed. Bron's getting the opposite lesson, and we're all going to pay the price for it when he's 35 and has already peaked because he never developed the complete skill set necessary for sustained excellence. Now, I know some of you are thinking I'm being too harsh, that I'm projecting negativity onto what might just be a veteran helping a younger guy. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Brock's intentions are pure, and he's genuinely just trying to help someone he sees potential in. But even if that's true, even if Brock's heart is in the right place, that doesn't mean his advice is right for Bron. Sometimes the wrong guidance from a legend is more damaging than no guidance at all, because you trust it implicitly. You don't question it because it's coming from someone who achieved everything in the business. But what worked for Brock in his specific circumstances with his specific gifts and his specific leverage might be completely wrong for someone else's path. The tragedy here is that Bron Breakker has everything necessary to be one of the true greats of his generation. The look, the athleticism, the intensity, the bloodline, the drive, it's all there. But he's at a crucial developmental phase where the mentorship he receives, the lessons he learns, the habits he forms, those are going to determine whether he reaches that potential or falls short of it. And right now, he's receiving mentorship that's teaching him to be a limited version of what he could be. He's being taught to be Brock Lesnar instead of being taught to be the best version of Bron Breakker. And that difference, that might seem subtle now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that difference is going to be the gap between being remembered as a special attraction who had a good run and being remembered as one of the all-time greats who defined an era. This is what should make every wrestling fan angry, not because Brock's a bad person or because he's intentionally sabotaging anyone, but because we're watching potential being limited in real time. We're watching someone who could create their own unique legacy, being molded into a tribute act. We're watching the next generation being taught the wrong lessons by the previous generation. And we're all just sitting here, accepting it because we're dazzled by the short-term spectacle. Bron's fury is real, his intensity is legitimate, his potential is off the charts, but the vision guiding him is flawed. And until someone has the courage to interrupt that process, to offer a different perspective, to show him that there's a bigger picture than just being the most physically dominant guy in the room, he's going to keep heading down a path that leads to a ceiling instead of to the unlimited potential he actually possesses. That's the real story here. That's what nobody's talking about. And that's why you should be paying attention to every single move, every single decision, every single piece of advice that Bron receives from here forward. Because his career, and by extension, our entertainment as fans, hangs in the balance. So share this video, comment your thoughts, tell me if I'm right or if I'm crazy. But whatever you do, don't ignore what's happening right in front of your eyes. Because by the time everyone else realizes it, it might already be too